Seele versus Yuan. Who is better for investment value in terms of now, the present, as well as the future in terms of holding their value as well. We're going to be talking about a numerous number of things, and if you guys are interested in my thoughts as well in terms of my bias, I'll leave it to the end, but I'll promise you throughout the major of this video, I'll be as unbiased as I can as well. And the first thing I want to talk about is in terms of current value. Whenever you talk about in terms of investment value and when you're buying a certain item, you want to know what it can give you at this very moment. And a lot of tests has been done in terms of beta calculations. A lot of us that have played the beta as well know that these two come extremely close. Not only in, for example, Yuan in an AoE fashion, but even Seele in a slight AoE is pretty decent as well, especially if we can one-shot squishies. And Yuan is also an insanely strong single target damage dealer as well. Both of them offer tremendous amount of potential in terms of what they can do, but I think in terms of current value, if I were to name one that ages out over the other, I would say Yuan is slightly better than Seele, and for a very, very simple reason. Yuan has Yun as well as he's able to form a full lightning team composition. This means that theoretically at the highest cap in terms of if you want to speed run a particular stage as quickly as possible, and perhaps all the enemies are weak to lightning, theoretically speaking, the chance of Yuan doing much better than Seele is much higher, because currently in the game right now, as of 1.0, we don't have a full quantum team for Seele, and even a mixed match doesn't seem to be able to 100% be suitable for Seele's kit. Of course, you could argue that Bronya is a very solid one for Seele as well, but you could say the same if you put Seele here or Bronya here with Yuan. And at any point of time, if you want to add a few comments for us to consider as well, do so in the comment section below. Just make sure that you word it respectably as well. I think I'm open to any opinions you guys have. Just make sure that it's representative, because there are other people in the chat who are not really as comfortable to criticism as I am. I'm quite comfortable with people criticizing opinions of mine. And next up, after talking about current value in terms of like how well they perform as DPSs, they are both very DPSs, so it's pretty easy and straightforward. One single target, one AoE DPS. The next thing we want to consider is definitely the alternatives to these two characters as well. One thing about investment value, of course, is about the other choices you have. For example, if you don't pick them, how much of a loss are you actually losing? How much are you missing out on in that aspect? And I think between the two of them, let's talk in terms of like alternatives between Seele as well as Yuan right now. Seele's competition is mainly the hunt characters we have over here, all single target in nature. I would say to a certain extent, she also competes with maybe some destruction characters like Hook, maybe Ireland as well, in terms of they do very solid amounts of single target damage, although they do splash a bit in terms of these three. Of course, she's more focused on speed. In terms of hunt characters are more focused on speed, but I think that is one thing to consider. These are potential competitors to Seele as well, but of course you could say the same, they could be brought here in terms of competing as well with Yuan. So I would think I'll like leave them somewhere in like the center if this wasn't blocking me, but those of you who are following through the video, you'll get what I mean when I place them here. And in terms of Yuan, I think his competition really is other lightning characters in the game, like lightning DPSs, AoE DPSs, and in particular I would think that Kafka is one of them. You have Zerval, and of course you have Himiko, you have Herta. I mean, I could drag all of them across right now as well. It's going to be a really messy, but anyone that does AoE probably competes with Yuan in some sort of way. You could even add Welt to that list, you could add Sampo as well, you could add Pella to that list. Tons of options in terms of AoE damage. Blade will also fall somewhere in here, would be along with the rest of the in terms of the destruction characters. So I think you can see here in terms of like AoE DPS, there are much more options, more flexibility in terms of team compositions when you're talking about alternatives. Whereas right now, I'm sure some of you who are building your team composition, you realize that single target damage dealers, especially those really strong ones, are a little bit harder to find. You can't really find them equally as well. Maybe I'll put Clara like here as well, maybe like somewhere in the center, beside my logo as well. So you guys will get what I mean. I think that in terms of alternatives, Yuan faces a significantly more alternatives, and not to forget that he has direct competition in the lightning category with a lightning DPS that's already in the game, as well as Kafka. If any of you are planning to pull Kafka, he does compete in terms of Kafka in a similar role. You could run both of them together as well, but you might be better off running a hyper carry Yuan to do a little bit more damage, or Kafka in another team. I've showcased like videos of Seele as well as Kafka in the same team, and those of you who have followed the channel or you're interested, go and check out the channel as well. It's like a Seele x Kafka team. I highly recommend any of you waifu collectors to check that team out as well, especially if you like Kafka. So I think in terms of alternatives, it's pretty clear that, in my opinion, I think as of right now, as of 1.0, Jing Yuan has far more competition compared to Seele, and I would say that Seele ages out in terms of alternatives in this category. There are still currently no quantum single target damage dealers to exactly fight for her particular role as well. Alright, now that we are done with alternatives, let's talk about the next part. Not only is like alternatives very important, we also want to talk about, in terms other than like meta, we also want to talk about style, because we must admit that Jing Yuan has a very interesting playstyle. I think if you're talking in terms of like enjoyability, in terms of the game, like something refreshing and not too boring, I would say that honestly, Seele's kit is quite simple and quite plain vanilla. Very easy to understand. It's like quite straightforward. You kill a target, you go again. You hit big PP damage, you do more damage. You stack crit, you do more damage. Quite straightforward to understand. I think Jing Yuan, out of the two of them, offers a bit more a stylistic presence. His kit revolves around Lightning Lord passive, where you have to stack like certain number of buffs on the Lightning Lord before the Lightning Lord comes down after a certain set of moves as well, a set of actions they have taken. And of course, I think out of the two of them, in terms of the ability to power creep, power creep style, the first of its kind, I think that Jing Yuan is much more unique, and his playstyle will be harder to replicate as well. Seele, on the other hand, if you're just playing her, other than the fact that she has lesser alternatives, I think her style is very easily replicated. You could even argue that Su Sang to some extent does feel very similar to style in terms of Seele, with that action advance after using her ultimate as well. I think those of you who play Su Sang might feel a sense of what I'm talking about already as well. And I'm gonna just put in this together with like the other category. Out of all the characters that we have seen in like Genshin Impact, Hoyo versus other successful game, I think there's this quote-unquote Li Yue 5-star rumor that is going around that all basically those characters that are from the Chinese kind of environment tend to be really strong, especially the 5 stars. And if we were to extrapolate that in terms of applying it here, it is a risk that we have to consider as well. Xianzhou Luofu that generally might be all better off in terms of stylistic presence. They might have a longer shelf life and be seen longer as well in the game, because he is from like the Chinese kind of region, which is like the Xianzhou Luofu. I'm just spitting random stuff here. It's not worth taking note of, but it's something that I have noticed and I think is worth mentioning as well. Okay, now let's talk in terms of potential. We talk about like currently what's going on, the competition and stuff, but let's look forward a little bit in terms of if future characters are added, who might actually see better upside in terms of the overall kit. I think that out of the two of them, in terms of one character that comes to mind, will be a character like Silverwolf. Granted, arguments can be made whether she could be here or here in terms of benefiting. I think she benefits both of them, but by and large, I would say she slightly favors Seele a little bit more than Jing Yuan because of the similarities that they have in terms of quantum element as well. She is able to drop weaknesses on the enemy based on her team composition, and having Silverwolf and Bronya on the same team, or Silverwolf and Seele in the same team rather, means you already will be able to drop quantum weakness on the enemy on an occasion. Of course, Jing Yuan, it doesn't mean he can't use the Silverwolf, definitely going to be really strong, but by and large, a lot of his composition already revolves in terms of like, for example, you have Ting Yun here who's going to be buffing the team composition. That means that your last slot, if it's a sustained character, for example, maybe you have Natasha, or you have Bailu, or you have Luo Ca, or some other sustain like a part, you will be finding it a little bit awkward in order to run this team composition without a strong single target damage dealer. Of course, it could work, but I do think it's a little bit challenging if you ask me, unless you of course place Seele in the last slot, but that's very expensive. So I think in terms of near-term potential, Silverwolf definitely adds quite a bit of value in terms of Seele team compositions. And upcoming, a future character that is supposed to be released as a quantum character is Fu Xuan. I'm sure most of you have seen her. She's likely going to be a quantum preservation unit as well. So in terms of like the even or slightly nearer term, or like still quite near, I think that Seele's team compositions do see a slight amount of upside compared to Jing Yuan's team composition, who will roughly be around the same. A bit stale in terms of variety of his best team composition moving forward, since you don't really get that replacement. Of course, I would say that in terms of cost, Seele's expensive team comps do get, or her best team comps do get quite expensive, whereas his team comps, Jing Yuan's team comps, remain relatively more affordable as well, especially when you have great value in a character like Ting Yun as well. So those are some of my thoughts in terms of potential. This is honestly like super fluff in terms of argument. You could argue either way in terms of like justification, in terms of like scratching the whole entire ocean. If any of you are super creative and have any other ideas, leave them in the comments below. I'll be happy to hear them as well. And before we go to the last category, if you're finding value in this video so far, do give it a like and subscribe for more of such future content. I try to make as much of this content as unbiased as I can to give as much of a good value for you guys to make a better decision. And now let's talk in terms of the last category before I share with you my personal bias. So far, I'm just giving you as plain simple as I can, as unbiased as I can as well. And I think the last thing to consider definitely would be free-to-play Lightcones. One of the biggest thing about investment is you don't want to be forced to pull a character and their Lightcone as well, because that's going to be a very hefty cost. You just want to invest, for example, a bit of Stellar Jades. I'm like a financial advisor in terms of how to spend your Stellar Jade right now. But if you don't have access to a lot of free-to-play Lightcones, or rather the difference between their signature Lightcone and the other alternatives that we have in the game that are free-to-play accessible is very great, then I would say that you will definitely feel a bit upset, especially if you're comparing with a lot of people who have more spending power, or maybe are investing a lot more resources into their Jing Yuan or Seele. And I think between both of them, the Lightcone that really stands out is Jing Yuan's Lightcone. I'll put it up on screen here, a screenshot of it, and you can see that it's extremely broken. Like, this Lightcone gives so much value in so many aspects for this character. Of course, granted, it can't be used by a lot of characters because it's very conditional, but it's really very well fit for Jing Yuan, and honestly, it makes him a tremendously very strong character. And one thing that we want to consider is a lot of the beta commentary that we had Jing Yuan with his 5-star Lightcone. A lot of people, when you are given a 5-star Lightcone, you won't be playing with like a 4-star free-to-play options. So I think that is something that is very important to consider, is the option between an expensive option like their signature as well as free-to-play options. And between the two, you can actually get a 5-star Lightcone for free in the Herta shop for hunt characters as well, which gives Seele quite a lot of the stats that she requires. I think between the two, in terms of differential of like their Lightcone versus a free-to-play option, Seele definitely stands out as being a much more cheaper option compared to a character like Jing Yuan. So between the two, I would say that she ages out, being slightly in terms of better investment if you don't plan to pull for the Lightcone. But of course, if you plan to pull for the Lightcone, their signature Lightcone, Jing Yuan definitely would see very significant differential between to other free-to-play normies like myself, if I were to only get just Jing Yuan without his Lightcone, which I might do. And in terms of my bias, just to end it off, I think between the two of them, I probably likely will be going for Jing Yuan but without his Lightcone, and probably E0 as well. And you guys know from my account, I have Seele quite well built as well. And if you guys like such content, do click on these two other videos right here as well. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.